this is exactly what we're doing here today by convening this event as we follow the progress of a report of child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, from detection through processing and investigation, and ultimately prosecution. The production, sharing, and possession of child sexual abuse material is a truly despicable crime that injures a child in the moment and then continues to re-victimize them as pictures or videos circulate online. Unfortunately, the number of CSAM reports is considerable domestically and internationally. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC in the US, received 16.9 million reports of CSAM in 2019, which included 69 million images and videos. The Internet Watch Foundation, or the IWF, in the UK processed a record number of reports last year, more than 260,000. The New York Times, as many of you have seen, has also brought attention to the dark underworld of CSAM and child predators through an investigative series over the past year. In the US, the number of industry reports of CSAM has been the topic of discussion around new legislation, congressional hearings, and Department of Justice events. Ultimately, we hope that today's discussion will go behind the numbers and examine what goes into a report, in the hopes that through working together, we can eradicate or at least reduce this material from the internet. Now, we are very fortunate to be joined today by a group of experts who work in their own fields tirelessly to fight the spread of CSAM and obtain justice for the victims. And this ambitious goal of eradicating, or at least reducing CSAM, will take enormous collective effort to achieve and require all of us to play a role. At FOSI, we talk about promoting a culture of responsibility where we all have a part to play in improving online safety for children and their families. We very much appreciate the cooperation between industry, government, law enforcement, NGOs, and individuals taking steps to detect, report, investigate, and prosecute those who make the internet much less safe for children. Now, throughout this webinar, we're going to invite you to submit questions, and I will do my best to get to these after a number of short presentations. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Marisa Morin. She is the policy advisor for Senator Ron Wyden. Senator Wyden is the lead sponsor of the Invest in Child Safety Act, a bill that FOSI is pleased to have endorsed and would see significant financial investment in combating these crimes. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen. And I also just want to start by thanking FOSI for convening this important webinar and inviting me to speak a little bit about my boss's work. So on May 6th, Senator Wyden, who's a senator of Oregon, introduced the Invest in Child Safety Act. This bill is my boss's vision to effectively address the problem we'll be discussing today, a problem that was so effectively brought to the public attention by the recent New York Times reporting. So that reporting has shown that more than 45 million instances of child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, is reported by tech companies last year alone. And these instances don't always get processed or acted upon because our federal infrastructure in the United States lacks coordination, accountability, and more importantly, the funding that it needs to protect the vulnerable children that we want to protect. So my boss's bill puts forth $5 billion in what we call on the federal level as mandatory spending, which means that this would be guaranteed money for the next 10 years. My boss wanted to put forth the Invest in Child Safety Act to achieve two things that he believes has been lacking in other proposals that have come forth on the federal level up to this point. And that's to set up this infrastructure that ensures accountability on the federal level and oversight, but also to fund prevention programs. The proposal creates a new office, which would be the Office to Enforce and Protect Against Child Sexual Exploitation, and it would be within the Executive Office of the President. There would be a director of this new office, and he or she would be held accountable by both the public and Congress. The director would be required to allow public comment on anything that he or she puts forth for strategy and also kind of funding plans for the money that the bill would put under his or her purview. The director would also be accountable by Congress. The bill requires that at least once a year, the director appears in front of Congress in a hearing to describe efforts to address this problem and also to explain how funding has been used. Also, the proposal prioritizes new money for prevention programs. And these would be evidence-based programs that would be able to stop this cycle of exploitation before it even happens, right? And it also would allow money for mental health and programs to help all of the personnel who are working to process CSAM and also act upon it, because of course this material is very difficult to view and difficult to deal with. My boss really wants us to always remember that this fight is something that we can't be forgetting. We need to make a permanent investment, and we also need to make sure that law enforcement also gets the resources that they need to be able to act on CSAM accordingly. So today you're going to hear more from some of the law enforcement entities that would be getting funding from this bill, namely the ICAC and NCMEC, who processes this material. But again, remember that these entities are one piece of the puzzle, and we want to be able to also fund prevention. So this bill has a vision of doing it all. So unfortunately, I can't be with you for the whole webinar, but I am more than happy to share my email in the chat, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the bill or generally on Senator Wyden's work. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marisa, for that. Really appreciate it. Obviously, hang in there as long as you can with us, but maybe I would ask you to just switch off your webcam. We can bring in one more of our panelists. We have a limit of 6 videos for this particular platform. And just by the way, before we bring in our next speaker, I'm already getting questions coming through. And maybe I can just put this out to the various panelists, and maybe you could even speak to this during your presentation. Sarah Jacobstein, I'm not sure where Sarah is from, and maybe if you guys could also let us know which organization and maybe even where in the world. We have viewers from all over the world for this webinar. How have the panelists seen content moderation impacted by COVID-19, and what are recommendations for improving moderation going forward? So maybe if you can wrap that into your presentation, and we can deal with that at the end, that would be great. Okay, moving along, I'm going to introduce a good friend of ours, Fozi, Remy Malan. He is the Chief Privacy Officer and Vice President of Trust and Safety at Roblox. And Remy, I believe you also have a few PowerPoint slides, which I'm going to ask my colleague Jonathan to throw up on the screen there. Anyway, welcome, Remy. I can see it. I hope everyone else can see it.
Right. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. It's great to be with you, and very happy to have a chance to share a little bit about what we do and our role in preventing CSAM. I'll take you through just a very quick background of who we are, because I think that'll help explain sort of what we do and how we approach things on our side. As Stephen mentioned in the introduction, we're looking at sort of day in the life and how things get started, how it travels to other reporting agencies from providers like ourselves who are out in the private sector providing platforms. Roblox, just very quickly, is very oriented towards children. We have a large cohort of children who play on the platforms of under 13s. There's a big group of 9 through 12s and also a group of 13 through 16s on the platform. So we know that on our platform, there's a high prevalence of children. And so that's why CSAM to us is a particularly important issue to address. Do next slide, please. We have on the platform a good representation of kids from all over the world. Almost 60% are under 13. We have a lot of girls on the platform, so we're not unlike sort of gaming platforms where you might say they're predominantly boys or male-oriented. Roblox has got a very strong social element as well as sort of an experience or game element. So 40% of the children are girls. And then while we're still predominantly in North America, 1/3 of the players and the people who go to Roblox are outside. Next slide, please. Right, and we talk about, when we talk about civility and safety, we talk about many different things, but what I'm going to do this morning is really focus in on the safety side of this. But we have many programs where we do work with parents, children, and others to help educate children about how to be good digital citizens. But an important part of that is what we do on the safety side. So next slide, please. And for us, I'll spend some time on this because this is sort of where things happen for us. So when we look at objectionable content, and I'm going to include CSAM in this, but there's other kinds of objectionable content we look at. We do a number of things that when people want to use particularly images or video or audio on Roblox, they go through a process of uploading that material. And so what we do at the time of upload is we apply various analytical tools to that content. For example, if someone uploads an image, we'll use a tool called PhotoDNA, which was developed by Professor Hani Farid and Microsoft, which is now widely deployed by many internet providers and platform providers. We also have some other AI tools we use. And then what we do as well, because we don't today perceive that AI by itself is an infallible tool. It's a very powerful tool, but it's just a tool in a collection of things that we do. The other thing that's really important to us is to backstop the automation and the analytics with human review. So today we still do 100% human review of the images that are uploaded, of the audio, of the video files that are uploaded onto the platform. Our goal there is to actually stop things from being uploaded. You know, our view on this is that if you're going to try and upload CSAM or objectionable content, we don't want it on the platform in the first place. And so we're going to do everything we can to stop it from being available. So for example, the combination of both AI and human gives us coverage because, for example, if there's new content, suppose there's a new CSAM image which PhotoDNA won't match against. Having human review in the loop allows us to find those, and having other AI tools allows us to find those. So our view is that one should always take an approach of layered tools and layered defenses in protecting for objectionable content. The other thing we do on the platform is really take a strong view around chat. We know that grooming and other activity related to CSAM might be happening in chat. So we apply on the platform chat filtering. For us, that's a really important part of this. We don't want kids to be engaging in grooming conversations. And so we do a number of things around chat filtering to prevent that. Our tools are designed to prevent kids from passing along personal information, for example. And so that's something that's just part of the platform. You actually can't turn off chat filtering on the platform. We run that continuously. So that's really important for us to be able to see the chat, detect it, filter it. And we do, of course, provide reports around chat if we see that there are things related to grooming or other offensive content in the chat. Beyond that, we also very much encourage people to report to us. You know, the final layer of defense is enabling the community to be able to contact us. We run many different reporting tools where people can send us reports through a number of different communication media. And we have a number of processes where we'll take very quick action against those things. And so from our perspective, we work very hard to prevent things from happening. We respond quickly if we do find something on the platform. I think at that point, I'll go to next slide, please. And so with that sort of as the introduction, we get to the point where if we have found something, we'll then turn to partners and other organizations we work with, for example, NCMEC. We also work very closely and are members of the Internet Watch Foundation in the UK. And our view is that this is a whole of society issue. We, Roblox, need to work with other organizations. We're very happy to be members of FOSI, and again, very glad to be able to join and view us as part of a interlocking group of organizations, people that help to prevent CSAM from being on platforms and then take quick action when it does show up. So thank you, Stephen, again, for the opportunity to join you.
Great, Remy, really appreciate it. And having started, and by the way, we're going to be showing another PowerPoint presentation, so that's getting loaded. It's just good that we've started with government, heard from industry. Now we're going to move into the more NGO sector or Quango sector. I think, Fred, is the way, it might be the best term for this, quasi-autonomous non-governmental organization, a term that I learned when I was in the UK. Before we bring you in, I just want to say we have a shout out from Akram at Online Safety in Lebanon, and he's asking, are we taking the advancement of technology into consideration when thinking about safety? And he's saying artificial intelligence, virtual reality, AR, machine learning, and others. Again, as you were presenting, think about this advancement technology. Okay, I think we're going to have to ask everyone to mute again. We're getting some funny feedbacks. I'm still hearing this feedback. Anyone else? No? No? We're going to press on. Thank you. That seems to have settled it. Now we're going to turn to Fred Langford, another good friend of Prosecution, Deputy Lead Internet Foundation in a very sunny and warm United Kingdom. So Fred, please take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, fantastic. And thank you very much. Yes, it's very warm and sunny, hence why all the curtains are closed behind. But as I was saying to you guys beforehand, it's very cold in my house, which is why I'm wearing a jumper. But thank you very much. I mean, you can move straight on to the next slide. Just to pick up on the point of the question previously about the advancement of technology. Well, that's part of my role at the IWF actually personally, is to be able to do that horizon scanning and potentially see how the technology being developed will impact upon children and not just children, but also how will it impact upon the offenders trying to access those children as well. So how would they might want to use that technology. But for the purpose of this panel, I'm talking about the IWF. So what is the IWF? Like you said, Stephen, Quango, self-regulatory body. I think we've been called just about everything in the past. But we are actually a charity and we are a not-for-profit organisation. So we're actually funded by the internet industry. So we have members, of which Roblox is one. Thank you, Remy. And we are predominantly funded by the internet industry. At the moment, we are still funded by the European Commission, even though technically the UK is no longer within the European Pact. We are still at the end of one of our grants, so we're still receiving funding that way. But we have a sliding scale of membership because we truly believe that the size of an organisation should not be a barrier to them being able to protect their systems. So we have this sliding scale of membership fees, but everybody who, once they're in as members of the IWF, they have the same access to the same services as everybody else. So that could be a very small organisation. It could be up to the size of Google or Facebook. We are a founder member of the International Hotline Association, of which I have to put my hand up and say I'm currently president of the International Hotline Association. So if you think NCMEC, IWF, there are hotlines in many countries around the world. And InHope is the membership organisation of those hotlines to be able to exchange reports and work on best practice between all the different hotlines. But most importantly for us at the moment in the UK, we are independent of government and law enforcement. Now that means that we can act as a critical voice to all parties, really. So we're able to be able to feed back to law enforcement what we're hearing from industry. Equally, we're able to take what we hear from law enforcement and government and take that back to industry to let them know and provide that safe space for industry to be able to talk. Next slide, please. But how do we do our work? So predominantly we are the public reporting function for UK. That's what we were set up for UK citizens. So initially the IWF was set up so if somebody stumbled across child sexual abuse content while they were on the open web, they had somewhere to report it to, and that was back in 1996. Actually, what's changed since then, we had 2 terrible murders in the UK in 2013 of Tia Sharp and April Jones. And actually what that did is it really raised the political interest in what's happening online, because both of those particular offenders, the 2 guys who murdered those 2 girls, had been viewing online child sexual abuse material in the build-up to committing the horrendous crimes. And we were asked, what does that mean for the IWF? Well, we went back to the Prime Minister at the time and said, well, we want to be able to proactively search for this. We don't want to have to wait for members of the public to stumble across this content and then have to report it to us, because that means that the victim has been re-victimized and that person has also been exposed to that imagery. And so at the time, the Prime Minister made some arrangements official arrangements for us to be able to proactively seek out the content. Now, this is not a phishing exercise. I'd just like to make that absolutely clear. We do not have the ability to be able to crawl the whole web. We're not Google, we are the IWF. So what we do is we're very targeted. We use humans because, as Remy says, AI is a tool that we use, but it's not quite there yet, and so we're not able to say at the IWF that we think that an artificial intelligence solution is actually providing enough reassurance that they are better than the human. Now it helps us with some of our workflow, but we don't actually incorporate it as a standalone system that we trust intrinsically. But it does mean that we can go out and use those sorts of tools to be able to pull back information. So that's our sort of automation. But we also have our team of analysts, because the crawler suites and the artificial intelligence doesn't find everything, and humans' brains are able to make those links between forums and sites that you might not necessarily be able to make just if you're programming this into a machine. But what happens is effectively the reports come in, and now we have a team of analysts. There's 20 of them in the hotline environment, a secure environment, and they assess the image. So they would take the URL that's reported to them and put it into a variety of browsers in a variety of locations around the globe to see what content we receive, and then we assess that to UK law, and then we will hash that image, which I'll come on to the reasons why we do that in a moment, trace the geographical location of the content, and then work internationally as part of that in-home network, law enforcement, government contacts, to be able to get that content removed at source. Because we know that until the content's removed at source, it's still going to be available to some people. We can put checks and blocks and all these sorts of things in place, but ultimately, if somebody really wanted to get access to that content, they can work their way around it. The only way to stop that is if the content's not there at all. So we would, if, as an example, in the UK, if we received a report of content and we assessed it as illegal and traced it to be hosted in Germany, we would then input that report into the in-home shared database system, and our sister hotlines in Germany would pull that report out and then be able to assess according to their law and their systems and processes they have in place in their country to get that content removed. We see ourselves as adding value to law enforcement. So if you think of what we do as the full value chain, we're able to assist. So if we see an image that's not of a recognized victim that we know of, doesn't match any of our hashing values that we have from various sources, we investigate that a little bit further, and we will be able to potentially pass on some information that law enforcement may not have had the time or the resource to investigate as quickly, whereas we've got that availability. So we will help with that. We also provide expert witness statements in court about how we receive reports, the sorts of content we see on those reports, and we also assist with investigations by providing our data sets to law enforcement. But ultimately, I keep talking about these data sets, but these are data sets and services. So when I go into the next slide, you'll see what I'm talking about there. So, but international cooperation is key to be able to get this content removed. Thank you very much. So these are listed services. I won't go through them all. You'll probably have heard of URL list is what the IWF is probably best known for globally, as well as in the UK. And that's a list of live URLs. So these are content that contains illegal imagery at the moment, and it's still not been taken down. Doesn't matter where it is in the globe. That list is updated twice a day, and we remove dead links as and when they're taken off and upload fresh links. And that's available for industry members who have signed our license agreement to make sure they keep that data secure and they act accordingly when they receive that data. It's predominantly used by broadband providers, fixed and mobile, search engines, these sorts of people to be able to stop those access points. But generally it's for inadvertent exposure. So if someone's clicking around, like I said earlier, they click on the wrong link, they'll get a warning. But we talked about image hash lists, which is really where we're moving to now, and Remy spoke a little bit about that, so I won't go into too much detail, but this is PhotoDNA, MD5, SHA-256, all sorts of different hashing algorithms that will run these ones and zeros that make up an image through, and they give you this value, and it's available for industry members to be able to carry out matching using the same algorithm. They can hash the image at their end and then compare the two hashes to be able to see whether or not that image is illegal. That helps for known illegal images. Obviously, if they're not known, we don't know, they're not in a data set, so there's another challenge there. But all these other services as well fit into different organizations depending on what their business model is. And so things like the URL list have different uses. So as an example would be, we were aware that certain platforms, that the offenders were starting to discuss the fact that they were having their images removed because of automation on image searching. So they reverted back to sharing the URLs with each other on that platform as well. So you can see it's a constantly moving beast. Next slide, please. So just a very quick one on this one. Stephen's already mentioned this, but I just wanted to say that yes, last year we processed 260,000 reports, and that's a 14% increase on 2018, but 132,000 of those did have content, images or videos of children being sexually abused, and that's a 26% increase on the previous year. Now those reports, just to be clear, that may have one image in it. These are reports of the URL, or they may have one image, they may have thousands of images, they may have one video, they may have hundreds of videos, but because of our resource limitations, we work based upon URLs. Next slide, please. And really, I wanted to leave it there, but just to pick up as well on the content moderation, this is something that's been, the question about content moderation earlier. This is something that's key, and I'm sure John will pick this up as well, because the IWF in the UK were considered an essential service. So when the UK went into lockdown because of COVID, we were able to keep our moderators, our team of analysts within our building. So we had permission for those to be able to move around to get to work and back, but obviously we had to make sure that they were safe in their environment. The reason being that we absolutely could not condone outsourcing or pushing out and viewing of child sexual abuse content outside of a secure area. And specifically when you're talking about home working. So we didn't want anybody to be viewing child sexual abuse material in a home scenario, regardless of what the situation is. So I think that's a very pertinent question. And the content moderation element of it is, it's obviously impacted on everybody. So as people have tried to make these changes and get their operations up and running, it's taken some time. So I will say that as with all these things, you have to bear with these folks to give them time to be able to make those changes. But thank you very much.
Great, Fred. Thank you so much for that. And shifting gears now from an international perspective to a US-centric one, we're going to bring in, again, another good friend of Fosie's, John Shehan, Vice President of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. John, you have a few minutes to let us know what the key work that you guys are doing right now.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And let me echo some of the previous comments where I just want to thank you and FOSI for hosting this discussion. You've done an amazing job bringing together a really robust perspective of panelists here today. So it's just fantastic. And yeah, I'm the Vice President of the Exploited Child Division at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. For those that aren't familiar with our organization, we've been around for quite a while. We were created in 1984. We are a private nonprofit organization. We're not an investigative agency. Sometimes there are folks that think we're able to do more than we actually can. We certainly don't serve legal process. We don't do search warrants. We don't kick in doors, and we don't prosecute cases. But we are right in the middle. We work closely with a number of different NGOs around the world, with industry, with law enforcement, really anybody in the child protection space. We're willing to partner and work with them to try and keep kids safe, because our mission, it's very focused. It's to help reunite families with missing children, to reduce child sexual exploitation, and to prevent child victimization. Our headquarters is in Alexandria, Virginia, but we have staff all around the country in field offices like New York and Florida, Texas, California. It was in the late 90s, similar to the Internet Watch Foundation, when we launched the cyber tip line. At that point in time, the internet was evolving. We wanted to have a central location where individuals anywhere in the world could report suspected child sexual exploitation. We deal with a wide variety of child sexual exploitation cases. By and far, the vast majority are regarding child sexual abuse material, whether it's possession, manufacturing, or distribution. But we also deal with online grooming, online enticement, child sex trafficking, and child molestation types of cases. And shortly after we created the cyber tip line in '98, in 2002, we created one of the first ever child victim identification programs, because we wanted to know who those children are that are depicted in the sexual abuse content. We wanted to know that they're out of that abusive situation, and at the same time focusing efforts trying to find identifiers and information that may help law enforcement rescue the children that's depicted in that content. Now, since the late 90s, the cyber tip line has grown into much more than just a domestic hotline. We are a global clearinghouse for information regarding child sexual exploitation. Since 1998, the cyber tip line has had over 70 million reports that have been submitted regarding some sort of suspected child sexual exploitation. And as Stephen kicked off, just last year alone, we had almost 17 million reports that were submitted. That was a significant number of reports, especially when you think of a very, very small staff size. So we rely heavily on technology to review and get through those reports to help elevate the ones where we believe a child may be at risk. And you know, I mentioned being a global clearinghouse. Out of those almost 17 million reports, 94% of those reports were regarding individuals outside of the United States that are either grooming children for sexual purposes or are trading, possessing, manufacturing child sexual abuse content. And how is it that someone like the cyber tip line gets this type of information? A lot of that can be traced back to one of the most significant, in my opinion, child protection laws that's in existence. It's 18 United States Code 2258A, which requires US-based companies that if they become aware of child sexual abuse content on their platforms, they're required by law to submit a report to the cyber tip line. And there are thousands of companies that have access. There are, you know, last year out of the 17 million, there's about 100 companies that have reported. It's really, the bulk is from about 10 to 20 companies that are taking a number of voluntary steps to make sure that there's this type of activity is not happening on their platform. So, but there are also international companies, I'll point out, that do utilize the cyber tip line as a central reporting mechanism and distribution hub for this information. For example, UBO in France, they're doing some amazing work to keep their users safe, but are also using the cyber tip line to submit reports, and we provide that to law enforcement as well. Our team, what we do is we receive this information and we're trying to add value. We're assessing it based on the criticality of a child, if a child's life's believed to be in danger, or if it's brand new material that no one in our department has seen before. We're trying to raise that to the attention of law enforcement so they can get to those reports much quicker than maybe some of the viral content that's out there where someone's reposting or resharing child sexual abuse material because they are outraged or they think that they're helping to identify the child. They don't realize they're breaking the law and they shouldn't be reposting that. But those are the types of cases we're trying to de-escalate so law enforcement can focus on those where there's imminent harm and imminent risks in there. And so we're adding value. We're trying to add additional information where we can. And ultimately, Our team makes that information available to law enforcement for their own independent review and possible investigation. It's up to them to decide which ones they want to work, which ones they don't. And in the United States, the bulk of our referrals go to the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. There are 61 state and local law enforcement that receive funding from the Department of Justice. And I just want to take a minute to thank them, to recognize all the hard work that they put in, because they get a lot of leads. They get a lot of leads from the cyber tip line, and internationally, there are over 115 countries and territories that accept cyber tip line reports. And we provide a cutting edge case management tool that was developed in sponsorship by Facebook to help law enforcement manage these massive, massive leads. India last year, they kind of had the all-time high of around 3 million reports. And you have to have a proper tool to manage those leads. And certainly some of the AI machine learning goes into those tools to help them sort and filter through those massive volumes. Because as I mentioned, 94% of those leads last year resolved internationally. And we partner with folks like HSI. I know Matt's going to speak in a few minutes. Some of those partnerships internationally to get that information to those countries wouldn't have been possible without the attachés and the work of Homeland Security. And we certainly partner with Interpol. They help to disseminate information to the NCBs, the National Crime Bureaus around the world, for any countries that are not directly receiving cyber tip reports. And then last but not least, of course, federal law enforcement. They have access to every single cyber tip line report that comes in, whether that's CIOS, we have Steve here today, FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, postal inspectors, you name it, military liaisons as well. But before I close, I just want to say, in addition to making information available to law enforcement, those industry reports or what comes from members of the public, NCMEC devotes considerable efforts into reducing child sexual abuse material online. And we'll partner with industry and other NGOs, but that could be sending direct notices to the hosting providers when we're aware of CSAM on their platforms, or providing those digital signatures. Fred mentioned the hash values. And there are millions that we provide to the companies that want to voluntarily take proactive steps to identify and remove child sexual abuse from their platform. NCMEC hosts 2 different platforms. One allows companies to share hash values, child sexual abuse hash values, amongst each other, as well as a platform that allows other NGOs like the Internet Watch Foundation, NCMEC, the Canadian Center for Child Protection, and others, that they can actually share the CSAM hash values amongst each other and make them available to industry as well. We're really trying to arm the companies and one another with the tools to reduce the amount of content that someone has to look at, but also to identify, remove this material online, because survivors is a huge focus for us in trying to reduce that re-exposure, re-victimization that takes place. What I will say is that all of the free services that we provide in an effort to protect children from sexual abuse can be found, and you can learn more about it at our website, missingkids.org. So feel free to check that out. Like Fred mentioned on the question on the content moderation, we of course have had to make some adjustments, but I can tell you that we've had staff still in the office, just different shifts, socially distanced. We certainly are still putting eyes on content. It kind of ties into the AI machine learning question. We rely heavily on partnerships with some of the technology companies. Palantir, for example, has done an amazing job helping us deal with big data. We have a series of different alerts. If there's something that comes through that we think would be of interest, maybe there's GPS information that's embedded into a file when it was produced with a mobile device, or there's an IP address that goes back to a place of employment, or based on photo DNA signatures and clusters, it's a file we've never seen before. We have a series of alerts with all this data that's coming in, so we know which ones probably need a higher priority, and we put eyes on those, we focus on those. We've partnered with companies like Intel Corporation, who've brought machine learning and artificial intelligence into the tip line that have helped us to better determine potential jurisdictions. We can weed through proxy IPs and Tors and those types of anonymizers to get into the data that's most useful. When you have a relatively small number of staff and a whole lot of data, you have to harvest this information in a responsible way and really leverage technology to your ability to fight this crime, because there's more than enough work to go around, and we really want to try and streamline those efforts of law enforcement and industry the best that we can. So thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so much, John. And actually, you answered a question we had from Neil Fairbrother. Does NCMEC take a proactive approach in the same way that IWF does, or does it only do submitted reports. I want to thank, we're having so many questions coming through from all over the world, and I will try and get to as many as we possibly can. Matt, we want to come to you and just quickly introduce you. You are the Chief of the Department of Homeland Security's Child Exploitation Investigations Unit. Really, really pleased you could make it. This is such an important part in the ecosystem here. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, as everyone has said, to Fosse for hosting this great event this morning. I'm happy to be part of the panel, and I hope the information that I get to share is as helpful as the presenters that come before me, and I know that Steve will be after me. So we really appreciate it. As you said, I'm the unit chief for our Child Exploitation Investigations Unit. For those who don't know, Homeland Security Investigations is the investigative arm of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and we're the principal investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security. And our unit, the Child Exploitation Investigations Unit, is part of the HSI Cybercrime Center, which was first established in 1997 when we were the old United States Customs Service, just to give a little bit of background. So for referrals, for leads that result in case initiation and the way that we start investigations, we receive reports related to illegal activity about online child exploitation, as well as transnational child sex abuse through a variety of different means. So I'm going to just kind of walk through those today. I think the New York Times article has been mentioned a couple times. It did a really good job, I think, of highlighting the huge problem that NCMEC is dealing with on a daily basis related to cyber tips, with industry referrals and the way that those are dealt with and the abundance of referrals that are there. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then also talk about some of the other paths that we see cases initiate, just to kind of help to, I think, paint some of the rest of the picture, hopefully. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, John gave a great overview, so I don't need to do much there. They're a critical partner, and I should say a great partner too. I mean, we literally have phone calls with somebody at NCMEC probably almost every day of the week, sometimes on weekends, and they're a great partner. We receive industry referrals in the form of cyber tips from them, and we also receive referrals. He mentioned their child victim identification program, and we also receive some of those referrals where they identify GPS coordinates in files, or they identify other information about a victim in the US or elsewhere that we're able to try to help with. And then HSI still serves, as John mentioned, as the conduit for cyber tips for a lot of overseas foreign law enforcement partners, where there hasn't necessarily been a transition yet to the foreign country government actually receiving the leads directly. We receive them through our attachés offices overseas, and then package them up and hand them off to law enforcement in those countries for action. And in those scenarios, we're pretty much just a conduit to be able to help facilitate making sure they get the important leads when they don't have a pathway to be able to do that otherwise. I think Steve will talk a little bit about the ICACs in a few minutes. John's already mentioned them. We work very closely with them, as well as a variety of other state and local partners. We're part of all 61 Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. So a lot of the cases that we work are in conjunction with those partners and those critical relationships. So we're working alongside our state and local partners every day of the week, and again, most weekends, working through challenges throughout the U.S. And so a lot of cases initiate, maybe a cyber tip went to a state and local partner. It ended up being something that was outside of their jurisdiction, and we're able to work alongside them to make sure that we're able to help affect whatever needs to be done with victims in other areas, or or offenders in other areas. And similarly, we work with the Virtual Global Task Force. We're part of that, and we're also part of global working groups related to child exploitation investigations, as well as victim identification efforts worldwide. So each year we receive a large number of leads from foreign law enforcement related to offenders that are in the U.S., child victims that are in the U.S., and so we're able to help work through those as well. For the leads related to NCMEC referrals, foreign law enforcement referrals, or pretty much any other type of lead that we may have come in, we're basically starting with a little bit of information that we have and working first normally to figure out if there's a child in immediate danger, and then also looking to see if there's violations that are pursuable if there's not a child in immediate danger. And if either of those scenarios are present, then we're taking steps to work to take additional investigative steps to identify what we're looking at. A lot of times this includes legal process when possible, but sometimes it's not possible. But when we can serve summonses or search warrants on industry to get additional information, we're certainly taking that step. And then the goal really is anything that we can do to get closer to where the child victim is or where the offender is, and then be able to package that information up from our headquarters component to be able to send it to the appropriate field office in the US or overseas if that's appropriate. So we have over 200 offices in the US, and then we also have over 60 offices overseas. So we're pretty much able to touch any area, and it's just a matter of narrowing it down enough so that we can get the lead in the hands of the right folks. But then understanding also that not all online activities that offenders are committing is going to result in a referral from industry. Sometimes industry just doesn't know and they can't report it. A lot of times they're operating on platforms where we can't get the information, industry can't share the information. And so the only way we're going to figure that out is through initiating cases through complex proactive investigations. So what I mean here is we're basically talking about our special agents operating online on the same platforms that the offenders are using day in and day out to trade material, but also to seek to harm children. So we're talking about everything from mobile applications, the dark web, chat groups, live streaming apps, or pretty much anywhere else you would imagine that offenders are. Our goal in law enforcement, whether it's HSI or some other law enforcement entity, is to be there too, so they're not able to operate and hurt children without somebody being able to figure it out. One example of this type of investigation was a South Korean dark website that operated for profit using cryptocurrency. The investigation was conducted in conjunction with IRS Criminal Investigative Division, which made it kind of interesting, and then also in partnership with the South Korean National Police and various other partners throughout the world. We were able to successfully arrest 300 offenders, more than 300 offenders worldwide, and help to identify and rescue more than 20 victims at this point. NCMEC was also a big part in the victim identification piece there and helping combing through the images and videos to help to identify newly identified victims. I want to note for the purpose of this that while I highlight the cryptocurrency piece, it's rare. Most of the time in these investigations, the currency of exchange by offenders is the material itself. So they're trading child abuse material to gain access, or they're trading child abuse material to gain access to other child abuse material. But sometimes we see offenders operating for profit, and in those scenarios, they're receiving things like cryptocurrency or some other payment mechanism to pay for it. Another place that we glean information to identify offenders and child victims is through seized media and investigations. So we're talking about ongoing or past child exploitation investigations. But a lot of times in these scenarios, we're discovering newly produced images or videos as part of the forensic analysis of the devices that are seized as part of a search warrant. So we hit a house, we arrest the offender, we seize a computer, we seize a laptop, we seize a phone. And then as part of that investigation, we're processing all that information. We're looking for images and videos that have never seen before. You know, part of that is our forensics process in the office, and then part of that is when all of those images and videos are submitted to NCMEC for their processing. And in those scenarios, when we identify images and videos that have never been seen before, our specialists in our victim identification lab are going through and essentially looking for whatever little clues that they can find to help to narrow down the location of the abuse, with hopes of getting to where the child is, to a house, and ultimately rescuing the child and getting to the offender. But sometimes it's just narrowing it down to a geographic location where we may be able to send it to a foreign law enforcement partner so they can take those next steps. Similarly, the forensics process and review of search warrant returns, when we're able to get responses from industry in these cases, leads to the same type of follow-on. A lot of times, shockingly, I know, offenders are talking to each other, and when they are, sometimes offender A is talking to another 10, 15, 20 offenders that are doing the same thing, or maybe even worse things than they're doing. And in those scenarios, we're actually able to comb through that information. We're able to use that to identify other offenders that are committing crimes, and sometimes working to also identify victims that are included as part of those crimes, so that we can package that information up and be able to send it to whatever the appropriate office is. Both of these types of cases, it's possible that it's a single child that's being rescued, a single individual that's being arrested, but sometimes it's a larger picture, and sometimes it's a conspiracy type investigation where we're actually talking about tens or hundreds of folks who are communicating online with the goal of exploiting children or causing children to be exploited. A couple historical publicly available examples where there's plenty of information that HSI has conducted over the last decade are Operation Delago and Operation Roundtable. They're both kind of dated, but there's plenty of information there, and I think they're both representative of what that type of organization looks like, and what type of, when we're talking about the horrific behaviors of folks that are conspiring together to abuse children, those are the types of cases that we're talking about. And we're generally talking about a lot of offenders and a lot of victims being subjected to the abuse as a result of it. For our efforts to combat transnational child sex abuse that's not necessarily online, we work through our Angel Watch Center to provide notice to foreign countries. Basically, when a convicted child sex offender who has a duty to register in the U.S. is traveling overseas to their country, we're providing notice to those countries so they can take action as they deem appropriate if they want to decide whether they let the person in or not. And then also as part of that, we operate our Operation Dark Angel program, which is an effort to identify U.S.-based offenders that aren't part of the Angel Watch provisions in International Megan's Law, but they are traveling overseas for the purpose of exploiting children, or they have traveled for that purpose. And NCMEC is a vital partner in this fight too. And the cyber tips that they're receiving from industry that indicates that an offender is pre-travel, meaning they're about to go to another country to exploit a child, they literally have the opportunity to help us to prevent that person from hurting children. We can stop them from traveling to the country and then presumably move forward with prosecution if possible in the US. But either way, if we get information and a cyber tip that says somebody's about to travel overseas to exploit a child, it gives us the opportunity a lot of times to help to stop that from happening when it goes to law enforcement here or in another country. And then the last place I wanted to highlight where we sometimes get referrals is through our prevention efforts, like through the HSI Guardian program, but also NCMEC's NetSmarts program. These are both great resources to help provide children and parents information about internet safety. And while it's rare, because they're learning about internet safety, sometimes that's the trigger that results in a report coming in or some report of abuse coming in. And then we can take that information the same way we take any of these other cases. If the child has been victimized, we can help to get them services, but then we can also work to identify the offenders based on the report. All of these scenarios are very different, from the cyber tips to the referrals from foreign law enforcement and anything in between, but they all typically start with a small piece of information. And all of them are going to require additional investigative steps to identify the child victim, which is always our priority, the offender, and then or the location of the crime if we can't get anywhere else. The steps typically are traditional investigative techniques coupled with some unique use of off-the-shelf technology as well as some other technologies, and then court orders or summonses when possible to industry, which is a huge help. But unfortunately, that doesn't always work in a day and age where the dark web is more prevalent than ever, and offenders are taking steps to evade detection of their behavior by using encrypted applications and hiding in anonymous platforms or whatever. A lot of times, the legal process is not the end-all be-all like it used to be. So that basically summarizes what I had for this morning.
Thank you so much for that, Matt. In fact, you started to answer one of our many questions coming in, just that moment about the dark web, but we'll try and get to that. I very much appreciate, Steve, your patience and forbearance. I also asked before we got started if folks would be willing to go past the hour. Everyone said yes, but we won't go too past the hour, but we want to make sure, Steve, we give you enough time to talk about your approach or the Department of Justice's approach. For those who don't know, Steve Grocki is the chief of the Department of Justice's Child Exploitation and Obscenity Section. Steve, thank you so much for waiting, and please, the floor is yours. You'll need to unmute, I'm afraid, Steve. Try again. Jonathan, can you help Steve here? We heard from you earlier. I'm not sure why we're not hearing from you now. Try again. Oh boy. The pleasures of technology and webcams. Jonathan, is there anything from our control panel we can do to help get Steve on?
Trying.
Okay. You know what? We're going to take a question, in which case, and Steve, you just keep talking, and at some point we'll hear from you. So we'll just cut back into you. We've had a question here from Maria Tamalini. Sorry if I've got your name wrong. What are the best practices, tools, technologies to prevent children from connecting with predators? And this links to another question, Roxana Marachi, again, talking more about preventative work. What are the educational efforts we can do to stop kids and maybe to alert parents when their kids are getting into danger. Let me just pause for a second. Steve, can we hear you? Do you want to try
I
again?
don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me
yes.
now?
All right.
Okay.
For those of you who heard that question, hold on to that. We'll come on to that later. Steve, please.
Well, first, yeah, very, very sorry that I got disconnected, and apparently when I reconnected, it dropped my audio. So I will try and go as quickly as I can through what my section does. I'm in the Department of Justice. We're subject matter specialists on child exploitation exclusively. A young section in Washington, D.C. That basically tracks the development of the internet. We've been around for a little over 20 years, just like the internet. We are federal prosecutors in the United States. So we bring federal crimes, and that requires an interstate or foreign nexus typically to the offense, which is why it tracks with the online threat against children so neatly, and that's why we've expanded certainly our scope of operations over that 20-year time period, because every offense that happens online has an interstate or foreign nexus, as we've already heard. Just want to tick through quickly kind of the way we approach the prosecution of cases. If I had to sum it up in one word, it's strategic. That word is important to us at CEOS. We work with U.S. attorneys' offices that are geographically located. Oops. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'm getting some audio. We work with U.S. attorneys' offices, which are geographically in every part of the United States. So District of Virginia, Maryland, where I live, they have their own prosecutors, and they have Project Safe Childhood coordinators that prosecute child exploitation cases. So we work closely with them, and they're bringing a lot of the cases that you see at the federal level. My office is about 20 prosecutors, and so we prosecute cases as well, but we also serve a function in advising on legislation and policy for the Department of Justice and trying to push legislative action that is going to benefit across a broad spectrum of potential actions in the United States and abroad that help children. That's our ultimate objective. So in doing that, we try to not only prosecute cases, but also understand where the problem manifests, understand how to develop a strategic response. Critical to that, as many might guess, is developing good computer forensic resources. We do have that in-house, and those resources are trying to stay on the cutting edge of how to analyze mobile devices, other types of computing devices, as well as understanding different internet technologies in web locations and where they're storing data now more than ever in cloud-based locations and things like that. And so trying to bring those sources of data together is critical to be able to prosecute cases, which obviously require evidence to actually prove a person beyond a reasonable doubt guilty. So that's another component of our work that is very, very important. A key piece of keeping the prosecutors in the field at the federal level, as well as the state and local level, and those computer examiners, is training. And so we do a lot of domestic and international training to try and build that capacity, not just in the United States, because as you heard from John and Fred, this problem is global. It's global fundamentally. And so the response that is happening over in Europe is critical to the U.S. Just as much as it is there, because children in the U.S. here can certainly be abused by offenders that are located anywhere in the world. I want to pivot just for a second, a couple of minutes, just to get some concepts out. I talked about how in our office it's important for us to understand the actual threat that is posed against children online. And I'll give folks kind of three key ways that I organize that concept. And that's going to be scale, complexity, and dangerousness. When I talk about scale, it's about just the sheer size of the problem, the enormity of the problem. We heard from John Shehan at NCMEC, 16 million cyber tips coming in. Fred in the UK and throughout the hotlines in Europe. That 16 million number at NCMEC doesn't include the numbers that they intake in Europe. It doesn't include the numbers of offenders and offenses that we see on the dark web, which Matt Wright referenced, where we've seen literally millions of offenders migrating to websites that are on the dark web, in which allows them to communicate with one another, trade images, and commit literally millions of crimes. Those millions aren't reflected in the cyber tip numbers. Those millions are not reflected in the IWF numbers that we heard earlier. And there are other platforms as well that are important when we look at scale, because as we heard from NCMEC, of the 16 million, the bulk of those come from 10 companies. And so what of the other companies that are out there? What are the other platforms that are out there? Other types of platforms that aren't necessarily company driven, like peer-to-peer platforms. There are thousands of offenders, thousands of images, millions of images being traded just on those platforms as well. So the scale, just that alone, is a massive, massive problem, and one that this group is trying to tackle. Complexity, again, I'm trying to move quickly. Matt hit on it. Encryption, anonymization, just pure technology as it develops. It is at such a rapid pace that it is very difficult for prosecutors and investigators to keep pace with that. Some of the technology enables offenses to occur in very stark ways that are very difficult to identify, very difficult to collect evidence on, and very difficult to present that evidence ultimately. The globalized nature of that offense is also problematic. You have websites that are commonly referred to as bulletproof hosting sites. One of the unique natures of the internet versus the physical world is when an image is on an internet location and it's identified in that location, law enforcement can't necessarily get to that location to actually physically pull that offline. Nobody on this call pulls that offline, with the exception of maybe Remy at Roblox. And so we're always reliant on the internet industry to actually take action for removal of content, because that content can be cloud-based, it can be stored anywhere in the world, and it requires that action. That's a level of complexity. The other level of complexity for us is that the number of images out there has been increasing, certainly in the last 10 years. The advent of mobile devices, cameras. So production of images, new production of images, has increased dramatically, which has really added to our complexity. Every one of our cases often involves an actual child now. The last is just dangerousness. And I think that what we see there, where imagery has grown more violent, more sadistic, and involving younger children, to the point now where they're involving infants and toddlers. Pivoting over to our strategic response, the critical piece for me is, as you hear the numbers that I just discussed, there's no way you can possibly prosecute every single one of those individuals. There's no way that Matt's teams can identify every single one of them. And so we have to be strategic in how we cope with this particular problem. We can't prosecute every case. And so the response has to be balanced. It has to call upon, as this call did, all of the different resources and all the different stakeholders that are out there that actually can have a meaningful impact. So from providers to NGOs and NCMEC, law enforcement, prosecutors' offices, victim service entities, all of these different stakeholders are critical to forming an adequate response to this particular problem and creating what I often just refer to as a culture of safety that seems to be lacking in the online environment, that prioritizing children in a way that we recognize they're using these technologies often much more frequently than adults, and they're also commingled with adults, that adults are playing the online games right alongside a 50-year-old and a 10-year-old as peers. And recognizing that and understanding that that creates an environment where the offender really has an opportunity to prey upon that child, and that we have an obligation to protect that child. That's what I'm talking about when we talk about culture of safety, and trying to have that match what we expect in the physical world. We don't expect adults at 50 to be playing with children on playgrounds, and we should have that same expectation in the online world. So that's my kind of spiel. I'm going as quickly as I can, as you can hear, and I apologize for having those technical issues. But our challenge really is to sort of wield the resources we have and the different stakeholders that approach this problem in a strategic way, so that we don't get out of balance. Just throwing everything into one area like law enforcement is not going to solve this problem. We need prevention. We need industry engagement. We need organizations like all the NGOs on this call to basically come together and act in a concerted way, in a collaborative way, because certainly the technology is not going to stop, and it has to be brought into the solutions, and it has to be explored as far as how we strike the right balance for kids and for all of our societies throughout the world.
Well, thank you so much for that, Steve, and really, really appreciate it, and appreciate all of you all for hanging in there past the hour. I think we could probably take a few more minutes, try and take a few more questions. In fact, Steve, I've got one right now for you. It's come through. Given what Marisa said earlier, what would the DOJ do with more resources as envisaged by the Senator Wyden bill?
Well, I think that, as I was just saying, that the key to developing a response in from legislation, I think it's no exception, is trying to accurately and utilize those resources in a strategic way. And that means, yes, you're going to require more law enforcement. I didn't get a chance to mention the ICACs, and it's a failing on me. They're critical part of this fight against online child exploitation, alongside Matt's teams at HSI and the FBI. So federal and state working together in partnership and enhancing that collaboration is a key element. That requires certainly more resources to deal with the cyber tips, as well as the other offenses that I identified on the dark web and other places around the online communities. So you need those resources to investigate, no question, but you also need technology to bring those investigators together to be able to wield information that they have in a proactive way, to be able to analyze it in a comprehensive way. And right now, you know, the resources dedicated to some of that technology development on that side of things is lacking. And so I think that would be one key element of where resources should go. Resources for prosecutors certainly are important, but again, trying to put our resources in a strategic, kind of economical, efficient way and wielding them that way is critical. And so certainly in my office, this is all we do, and we could do more of it with more people, but we also need better computer forensic resources so that those analytical methods keep pace with the technology as it develops, that we have capabilities to actually access phones, because I can have 25 to 100 computer forensic examiners, and if they're all sitting in front of mobile devices that are inaccessible to law enforcement due to encryption, there's very little that they can do. There's very little that they can actually access. And so that's a problem, and that's a problem that we need to invest on our side in developing techniques that allow us to access that. The computer cyber tips that were referenced for NCMEC is critical, that being able to review those and access those and act upon the ones that reflect the most dangerousness and the greatest harm to children is also a key feature, and that requires monetary resources. Right now we're talking about 10 companies. We certainly want the model that Remy put out in the initial set of slides to be industry standard. We want industry to be reacting and creating safe environments for children wholesale all across the internet. We have to understand when they do that, it's going to likely lead to more, a significant increase in cyber tips. And so being able to process that, get that to law enforcement, allow them to collaborate in online platforms and communicate with one another to drive the best strategic prosecutions that we can, and identify clearly what the threat is. Those are all features of a strategic plan that would require additional resourcing through financing and bodies and technology.
Great, thank you for a very comprehensive answer. I think we have time for one more. John, this was directed at you. Do you track, or does NCMEC track reports once they've been passed on to law enforcement?
Oh, great question. And yes, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the case management tool that I mentioned has been built out. It's brand new in sponsorship with Facebook. It makes the entire ecosystem much easier. Not only can law enforcement better manage the reports that they're receiving, but it makes it much, much easier to receive feedback on the outcomes of the reports. I can tell you from a domestic perspective, we get an amazing amount of feedback on the outcomes of cyber tip reports from the ICACs in federal law enforcement. International law enforcement, there's no requirements for them to provide the information. Some are better than others. We certainly are always soliciting. We have staff that are dedicated towards following up on those cases, and we certainly are chasing, especially on the higher priority ones. We want to know those outcomes. Many times we're doing Google searches as well and learning about cases after the fact, but we have evolved the process. well past the old days of having to fax us feedback forms or fill out online documents to now being able to very quickly connect through those case management tools or electronic means to get those outcomes, because we want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the cases that may have resulted in an arrest, but how about the cases that were not actionable? What's the problem? Why did that happen? What kind of feedback can we collectively give to industry? They want to know that too. That's the only way to improve the process. So yes, we are absolutely trying to follow up on every case where we can. In some law enforcement, some jurisdictions are better than others in giving that data.
Excellent. And in a very short response, Fred, are you guys tracking as well?
No, not in the same way at all. Like John said, there's a completely different environment in the UK. There's no mandatory reporting requirement for organisations to report instances of child sexual abuse content in the UK. And equally, we do get some feedback, but it tends to be on either a major case that we've had a major input in. But the majority of the content that the IWF find is not hosted in the UK. We actually have a very low amount of content hosted in the UK. But that's not to say that people aren't accessing content hosted in other countries, and John will be able to clearly give those figures and say that that the referrals are going back to UK law enforcement. But because the IWF are focused on identifying that content and getting it removed at source, we don't have that same data set from industry which we would be able to manipulate. So all the metadata around the information, the IP information of who uploaded it, etc., etc. We don't get into that area because we sit outside as an NGO. But actually, the UK, I was probably quite down on the UK on feeding back to us. They're actually very good in comparison to the majority of countries. So I wouldn't say that we just don't have the same level as you do in the US.
All right, thank you so much. And again, thank all of you for hanging in there and overcoming the technical difficulties and so on. Very much appreciate your time and expertise and all that you do to try and keep the online world, including the dark web, safer for kids. We cannot ever make it 100% safe, but safer. And only just encourage you to continue to work together with us, with each other, and across international borders. And as I've seen through the many questions, which I'm afraid I haven't been able to get to, this is obviously a global issue and one that can only be done with international cooperation as well. Just some final words to say that we are going to be sending out a recap email with the recording of this video. I should have said that at the very beginning. Everyone was being recorded. And we'll be back in touch with you on that. We have another webinar coming up next week, COVID-19 and the return of the free-range kid, a totally different look on the pandemic and what's happening with Lenore Skenazy, the author of Free Range Kid, and some of her extraordinary work that she's been doing. But again, thank you all for joining us. Please stay safe and strong and resilient, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all so much.